Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel. Hey everybody, if you can believe it, it's Thursday again, and it's time for another Thirsty for Theory Thursday podcast. And today I'm really excited to have as a special guest, Dr. Silkman. How are you doing today, Dr. Silkman?
I'm doing well, Big Jeff, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, well, just getting back to item FL, right? Now, goes to show how shocking the MTSO and the investigators were, right? Because I believe there was 5 to 7 times they had been in the garage and they turned the place upside down. They didn't find any bullets, nothing. They found casings, right? And they were trying to make a big deal about these casings until they actually interviewed in the court the actual owner of the rifle, right? And they spoke to him. Yeah, they spoke to him and said, well, did you fire this gun? And he goes, yeah, I fired about 2,500 to 3,000 rounds all over the place. They asked him, did you fire that weapon in the garage? He goes, of course. He used to fire at both rabbit and gopher holes around the garage. And so what happens is with these rifles, when the shells eject, they fly off. So it's very, very easy for him to have been standing in the entrance of the garage, firing out, and the shells would have ejected inside. Now, if you are saying that Stephen and Brendan are forensic gurus, that they were able to clean micro spray, how come they left 11 shells lying on the ground? How insane is that, right? And yet that's what the state was proposing, Big Jeff. And Roland, the owner, said, hey, I can't help where the shells eject, and even stated that there's a possibility that they flew in the garage. So in other words, there was always an alternative logical explanation. Now, item FL. Yeah, item
Did we have
FL.
a question from Christy? Did you have a comment?
No, not at all.
Okay, so with item FL, that was discovered by the investigators, and of course it was given to Cherie Culhane. Now, item FL was found on March the 2nd. It had remained in the laboratory until March the 16th, and finally it was tested on March the 29th. So there was a big lag period between when it was found and when it was tested. Lo and behold, Cherie Culhane found that the DNA on the bullet matched the profile of, guess who? Teresa Halbach. Now remember, they didn't have DNA from Teresa Halbach. They had to obtain a DNA sample from a pap smear. Now there was a gentleman's agreement going to question the origins of the pap smear. So item FL had DNA that matched the pap smear, i.e. from Teresa Halbach. But there were multiple problems with item FL. Jeff, would you like me to go into those?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think this is the crux, the most important thing that we can talk about.
Yeah, so it all looked pretty good, right? She extracted DNA from the bullet. It matched Teresa Halbach. Hey, that means that the story must be true. This poor victim was shot in the head, in the garage. These two guys are guilty. Send them to prison. But there were problems. First of all, there was no blood on the bullet. There was no tissue on the bullet. The bullet was clean. There was no evidence that it hit anything. It was a clean bullet. So normally what happens when a bullet will penetrate a body part or skull or whatever, you've got some physical evidence that it went through or into the skull. Now remember, they had cranial bone fragments. They had beveling, right? And that means that a high velocity bullet had penetrated the skull. Well, forensically, they proved that item FL got shot from the rifle that was found in Stephen's bedroom. No question, because when a bullet goes through the barrel, it leaves marks on it, grooves, and you can forensically prove that it came from that barrel. Now, when they checked the cranial bone fragments, they found tiny flecks of lead in the cranial bone fragments. That's a perfect indication that a bullet transited through that bone, because what it does is part of the outer coat of the bullet is deposited in bone. That happens all the time. You have these very tiny flakes. Well, believe it or not, the analysts did not check the bullet, as in they didn't do analysis of the bullet and the cranial bone fragments. So hence they couldn't prove that item FL had struck any bone at all. But wait a minute, where did Teresa Halbach's DNA come from? Right? I mean, it's obviously her DNA. Well, the state gave the bullet to Kathleen Zellner and her experts. Now, what they did is they placed the bullet under very high-powered microscope, and they do an elemental analysis, trace elements. Lo and behold, they didn't find any shards of bone. Chemically, there was no bone in the bullet. Her expert fired .22 rounds into bone. They were shoulder blades of, I think, of a cow or cattle, the same thickness as the skull. Every one of the bullets that went and penetrated the bone had bone shards in it, right? So in other words, it was proof that it actually hit bone, because the lead is quite soft. Therefore, item FL could not have struck bone. But Big Jeff, to make matters worse, what they found was elements of wood, right? Wood shards, and also red flecks of what appeared to be paint. Well, Zellner showed that the garage is red and it has wood paneling. So what must have happened is that Roland, when he was shooting at the gophers or rabbits, hit the garage. The bullet got lodged in the wood paneling, and maybe because of the freezing temperatures, the bullet popped out and fell on the ground. But here's the problem, Big Jeff. How does the state now explain what Teresa Halbach's DNA is present on item FL? Right? Where did the DNA come from?
It's mysterious. It's not clear to me how, if a bullet actually went through Teresa Halbach, how it would still have sufficient velocity to impart wood on it and paint in the way that item FL had.
Yes.
And
so,
aren't there more fundamental questions about the velocity?
I'll got you.
Very good. Yeah, if you could fill us in on that, that would be great.
Yes,
too.
but just let me explain. When Ken Kratz was asked this, he goes, item FL didn't go through skull, it went through her body. So he was changing his scenario as the new evidence was being tested and found. I didn't hit her in the skull, it went through her body. But there's one problem. The bullet is not high velocity enough to penetrate and go straight through a body, because they've done studies whereby they've got ballistic gel, and you can see that the bullet only penetrates a small distance in the ballistic gel. It doesn't have enough penetrating power. And let me just state this. I know it's morbid, but apparently the .22 round is the weapon of choice by hitmen, because it penetrates the skull and bounces in the head, destroying the brain. Right? It doesn't go straight through, right? It bounces within the skull, right? But the problem was the rifle that Roland had cannot fire high velocity rounds to penetrate bone. So the victim must have been shot at very close range, i.e. a gun directly onto the head, right? And it must have been a high velocity bullet that caused the damage to the skull. But that's diverting. Here's the problem. It was discovered that Cherie Cohen had contaminated the negative control when she was preparing item FL. That's problem number one. Her own DNA was present in the control. Problem number two, she used all the DNA that she extracted from the bullet for the PCR, which meant she could not go back and retest the bullet.
If you'd be so kind, Dr. Silkman, to tell people what a PCR is.
Yeah. PCR stands for a polymerase chain reaction. Basically, what you do is all the reactions are done in a small test tube, and you amplify up DNA using an enzyme, a special enzyme. And in order to amplify the DNA, you use these things called short tandem repeats. And I actually did a video presentation that went through this whole procedure. And please have a look, because I actually look at the protocol that Cherie Cohen used, and I explain it step by step. So PCR means you amplify up DNA. Now, you probably have seen Jurassic Park. Same deal. You have a small amount of DNA, you amplify it up, so you have lots of quantities. You can see it on a gel. You can clone it, sequence it. It's a brilliant procedure. Well, Cherie Cohen contaminated the negative control. She also used all the DNA for the bullet, which meant, according to her laboratory protocol, Big Jeff, what you do is, if you contaminate the negative control, you have to discard all the results. You toss them out, because you've now got contamination in the lab. So if you contaminated your control, you could have easily contaminated your test. So in other words, she could have inadvertently introduced Teresa Horbuck's DNA into item FL, because she's got contamination taking place. Therefore,
I think that's a very difficult concept to understand. This concept of a negative control.
Sure.
I did a little research. I wonder if I could give you a simple scenario of a negative control, and you can tell me if this is anything like what's happening in this case.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm a dog food company. And I want to prove to the world that my dog food results in healthier dogs at adulthood if I start feeding my dogs when it's a puppy. And I take two puppies from the same litter. And one of these puppies is going to be my negative control. I'm going to just treat this dog as I would any other dog, but this dog doesn't get my special new dog food.
Yes.
And I take the other puppy and I feed the other puppy my special dog food that's going to make him grow up to be the healthier of the two. But it turns out that over the course of growing up, my first puppy, who's my negative control, ends up dying of cancer.
Oh boy. Yeah.
So that means my negative control has been spoiled because something, perhaps him and his litter mate has this genetic predisposition that just makes my experiment go invalid. Is that the same type of, so the negative control spoiled means that the entire experiment is just invalid and needs to be thrown out.
Is null and void, and I've argued this with guilters till I'm blue in the face. They don't simply understand it. Guys, you do controls to test, to make sure that you have integrity of results. So the negative control in a PCR means there's no added DNA. So you have a negative control that doesn't have any DNA in it. So when you do the experimental protocol, Big Jeff, you don't expect to find any DNA in the negative control. If you do have an amplified product, it means that you've inadvertently introduced DNA in that negative control. The experiment is spoiled. Hey, no big deal. What you do, and the laboratory manual tells you, you discard the results and you redo it again. Also, in a forensic laboratory, you record the contamination event in a log book. Guess what, Big Jeff? Guess who had the highest contamination record in the laboratory?
How many guesses am I going to need?
Yeah, Cherie Cohane had the biggest contamination record out of the whole lot, right? So she was prone to contamination. That's cool. You record it down in the contamination log and you redo the experiment. But Big Jeff, here's the problem. You've got the most important forensic sample in the whole case. And she ruins the experiment. She's got no more DNA left, right? And to make matters worse, according to her own protocol, right? If you contaminate the negative control, right, it is inconclusive for match purposes, right? Her own laboratory manual under evaluation of controls. This was presented in court, in the courtroom, so everyone could see it. It is inconclusive for match purposes, right? So in other
it just
words,
seems to me that if it were viable to be able to determine a match, that would be
Yes.
explicitly stated in the
Correct.
book. And the reason why it's written in the manual the way it is
Yes.
because that the statistics tell you that
Yeah.
you're just not going to be able to get reliable information out of that, and it's just a
Correct.
statistical fact.
correct.
That's
But
why
Big Jeff,
that's why it is like.
yeah, but Big Jeff, here's the kicker. You can only use the results for exclusionary purposes, not inclusionary purposes. So you can say there was a DNA of person X, right? You know that the victim in this case is Teresa Horbach. If another DNA sample came up for another victim, you can say, aha, it wasn't Teresa Horbach, correct? But what Cherie Cohane wanted to use the result for was to say, it is Teresa Horbach. So inclusionary purposes. So therefore, she did a triple whammy. A, she contaminated the control. B, she used up all the DNA, it couldn't be re-extracted. And 3, she wanted to use it for inclusionary purposes, right? And her own manual tells her this. So guess what, Big Jeff? You know what she did?
To me, it sounds like an act of malfeasance. But,
Yeah, well, she decided to obtain a deviation request form, right? And she was asked in the court, how often have you ever done this in your, I think it was over 25 years in the laboratory? She goes, once, this time, because she knew. Could you imagine if she went to Fassbender and Kratz and said, guys, I can't give you an answer on item FL. It's a no-show. There's your case right there. You got no method of death. You got nothing linking the cranial bones to anything, right? It would have been her career. She would have been fired. So what she pulled, sorry, Big Jeff.
If I could just, what is the circumstances by which she used all of the DNA? Was it by accident, or was she just so desperately needed to get the DNA off?
Well, look, Big Jeff, her own laboratory protocols say that when you do a DNA extraction, you keep at least half, right? You put half away. And one thing about DNA, and I've worked with DNA for years, you can't see it. So you can't easily quantitate it, as in measure. I mean, there are ways you can measure the DNA, but she thought ahead. She thought, if I waste my sample quantitating it, I might run out of DNA. So she decided to say, okay, I'm going to use all the DNA, which is ridiculous. What we do in the laboratory is we try a different range of DNA volumes to do a PCR, right? So you might try 1 microliter, 5 microliters, 10 microliters, do the experiment, see if you get a result. No, she decided to use the entire lot, which means you no longer have fair forensic testing. No one can come along and retest the sample. It's gone. So
wouldn't you expect that a bullet that went through a victim would be a rich source of DNA?
oh god, yeah. Oh, no.
So what's the panic? What's the panic all about?
The panic was Big Jeff. She saw nothing on the bullet. Right. Now think about it, right? It's meant to have gone through skull. It's meant to have gone through brain, because remember the bullet was found on the ground. So therefore it went through. Well, think about this. The bullet didn't bounce off the skull because it's got beveling. So it meant that it went through skull, through brain, through blood vessels, through tissue, and back out. And back out. Phenomenal.
Ken Cry. I mean, this is almost reminiscent of the JFK story, but
yes, it is. It is very much so.
But
yes, it is.
Ken Kratz has suggested that being shot 10 or 11 times, perhaps
Yes.
item-FL just wasn't the bullet that went through the skull.
That's right. Now, so now he started changing his story and going, well, maybe it went through her body. Okay, that's cool. But A, it's not a high velocity bullet, and B, where's the tissue? And where's the blood? Right? And don't forget, a bullet's got to penetrate straight through, and it goes through multiple layers of skin, fat, muscle, tissue, organ, may have struck bone. Nothing.
Oh, there was no bone, that's for sure.
No, it's correct. It's completely clean. The state obviously was not aware of how damaging her specialist was to item FL. Right? And what did they do? They did the right thing, what a scientist would do. Kathleen Zellner and her experts went to the Avery salvage yard and fired bullets into the garage. Lo and behold, they resembled item FL. Right? Unbelievable proof.
Not surprising. Not surprising.
There you go. And yet the state didn't do the same, because the state, I hate to use the word, rush to judgment. Right? They needed to put Stephen away quick, but they were sloppy. And that's why Kathleen Zellner was able to come back, look at the forensic evidence and say, guys, this is junk. And it is. Right? Complete junk. But going back to the deviation request form, the amazing thing was this. Her own supervisor, which was Marie Variali, did not sign the deviation form. She actually went to the Milwaukee laboratory and got Gretchen de Groot to sign the form. Right? And furthermore, she even wrote the reason why she wanted that deviation. And she actually explicitly wrote what she needed to have actually done. And she even said, and I'll quote the last sentence, if I may. Therefore, I propose a deviation from the protocol, allowing me to use sample FL for inclusionary purposes, which her own laboratory manual said, no, you can't do that. You cannot do that.
Just amazing. Now, this sounds like something at trial that the defense could have prospectively objected to, because now did they have the expertise on their team to be able to explain this to not only the jury but to Dean Strang and Jerry Butte?
Well, look, Buting was right on the ball. I must admit, he had spent a lot of time on this. But the problem was they didn't have a DNA expert. the DNA expert would have said, excuse me, you're going against your own laboratory rules. You can't use this sample. And I've argued with guilters when they say, oh yeah, but Ida Meffel's got Teresa Horbuck's DNA. And I say, no, you cannot conclude that because you had a source of contamination. And when Shariko Hain wrote up her laboratory report, she just stated this, and I'll quote, the manipulation control extracted with the bullet fragment, Ida Meffel, contains DNA that is consistent with the analyst. That's it. So what she did was she hid the fact that she asked for a deviation request form, and she didn't explain the significance of having a control that was contaminated. She hoped that no one was going to read the report and ask the pertinent questions, right?
So did she essentially perjure herself on the deviation form?
She said in a court of law, she said, yes, I was justified to use that deviation form. No, you're not justified to use that deviation form. Her own manual says what you do is you toss out all the results and you redo the experiment. And the problem was for her, it was a one-time deal. She could not go back. Therefore, she had used up all the sample. But to make it worse, Big Jeff, the experts of Zellner showed that bullet never struck bone, right? So now the embarrassment is this. Where did that DNA come from? So the best Cherie can say now is, I can't draw any conclusions because I had a contamination event. Item FL potentially is the ultimate proof of evidence tampering. Do you understand, Big Jeff?
I do, yes, absolutely. Because
evidence tampering.
Where did it come from? Where did it come from?
Yes, that's direct. Hey, if this bullet didn't strike anyone, where did her DNA come from? And the answer is Shariko Hain put it in there, right? Now, don't laugh. What I discovered was she had kept all the swabs that she did at her bench in a cupboard. She held onto those swabs for months, and then she gave them to the proper storage area. So that means that potentially Teresa Horbuck's DNA could have been anywhere. On equipment.
Or everywhere.
Exactly right. Listen, when you work with DNA, it can form a micro spray and go anywhere. Which means that if you've got contamination in a control, that means you can't trust any result and you chuck it out. Therefore,
if we were to list the irregularities, for irregularity number 1, using the whole sample.
Correct.
Irregularity number 2 is
contamination of the control, which can happen, Big Jeff. It's no big deal.
But then you do the experiment over.
You do it again.
Irregularity number 3 is improper use of the deviation.
No question about it.
Are there any, because she went completely around what the deviation was could possibly have been used for. Did I miss any? So there was 3.
Yes.
Glaring deviation.
Well, the worst one was when they interviewed Garn, right, in the hallway, and the reporters, they're not dumb. They're saying, well, her own laboratory manuals tell her you can't do this. And Garn said, well, common sense has to be used here. And a little bit of deviation is okay. Because they knew that if you couldn't admit item FL, you had no means of death. You couldn't link the cranial bone fragments with the bullet, right? So nothing made any sense at all. Right?
It's just outrageous the deviation of just logical scientific procedure here is
Yes.
it's as glaring when you sit down and have an expert explain it to you as the key.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's just incredible.
Yeah, and also with the key, the other thing that I forgot to mention was with the key, she used the entire swab, right? There's no more. You can't retest the key. It's all gone. Now, how do you
as the bullet?
Yeah, how do you work out this, right? You got a key in the trailer. The key apparently belongs to Teresa Horbach, but it doesn't contain her skin, her oil, her fingerprints, or her DNA or blood. There was no blood found on the key. Cherie Cohen, what she normally does is a presumptive blood test. They take a swab, they put phenolphthalein on it. If it turns pink, hey, we got blood. No problems. You got blood, you got white blood cells, you can do a DNA test. Nothing. Lo and behold, what does the key contain? It contains DNA only of Stephen, none of the victim. And then you had all these ridiculous garbage excuses about he's a good shedder, he's a good this. Rubbish.
Well, I wanted to go there. And what I would like you to do, if possible,
Tell us.
are you prepared to make a firm statement to the world that Cherie Cohen claimed that there were a bunch of scientific papers that claimed that the shedder's DNA will block the DNA of other people on that? Do you recall that statement she made from the stand?
Yes, I do. And
are you prepared to say that is junk science, no truth at all to it?
That is completely junk science. Now, let me tell you why. Because to prove it, they had a DNA expert. I forgot his name. It escapes me. Ma'am, too. A really lovely guy. You could tell when he looked at the results, he was shaking his head, saying that's complete rubbish. So what Zellner did was she got a whole heap of people to touch the hood latch, right, and extract DNA.
The key of the hood latch.
It's essentially the same thing, because with the key, what Zellner did was she gave a key to Stephen, right, to walk around with, I think, for about 8 to 12 minutes. The amount of DNA that they extracted from that key was nowhere near what was present on the key. And that's why I bought the hood latch, because remember, Ken Kratz said, Stephen Avery went under the hood, put his sweat on the hood latch and left all this DNA. Well, the problem was he'd left so much DNA, he left more than 10 times what you would normally find. So what Zellner did was she got, I think, about 15 people, don't quote me on the actual number, to touch the hood latch. The majority of the people left no DNA, right? No DNA, because there's no DNA in sweat. And the amount of DNA that they left was about 1/10 of what Stephen apparently had left. So the state had no idea that someone was going to come along and check the validity of the results. It's complete garbage.
What I find remarkable, that it's possible that the same DNA or the same, let's say, forensic analysts use junk science 2 different times in 2 different trials
and
to
the
put
same
an innocent
person.
man in prison. The same
person.
Innocent person in prison.
Yep.
What are the odds? It's just unbelievable.
And the irony is this, right? Now, there's a direct conflict with Cherie Cohen because she was involved in Stephen's initial case, she was involved in Stephen's exoneration, and she was involved in putting him back to prison again by doing all the forensic analysis. We know that Tom Fassbender was whispering in her ear about putting the victim in Stephen's trailer or garage. Oh my God, as a defense attorney, you'll be horrified by that statement. as a judge and a jury, you would be horrified by that as well, because there is no fair forensic testing. But here's the kicker. They didn't allow the state coroner, to come on the Avery salvage yard and document the bones and cremains. Yet, they allowed Cherie Cohane to not only swab the RAV4, but to swab Stephen Avery's Grand Am, contain and have access to all the swabs in her area. Okay? So you have one lab tech who has a tremendous amount of conflict of interest, who has a special investigator and Lord knows who else whispering in her ear about what type of results they would like. You have a person who has a high contamination rate, right? And where's the trust? Where's the fair forensic evidence whereby the state can potentially arrest a coroner to do her job, who had no conflict of interest, and these buffoons are saying, yep, Cohane, Colburn, Lenk, Remiker, come in boys, do whatever you want. Now please, Big Jeff, I think our listeners are smart enough to realise that there's massive degrees of conflict of interest everywhere, right? Everywhere.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And the more you speak, the more it becomes clear, I think, that Cherie was acting not through incompetence, but rather through a more planned malfeasance, let's say.
Yeah. Well, put it this way. It seems to me that there was a desired outcome. Now, I know I can't prove it, but by law, she had all the samples, right? And I actually did a presentation on how easy it was to set up the RAV4 with blood.
Well, let's talk about that. If you have the time, let's talk about it.
I would love to talk about that. And this will be my final part of our interview, if you like, Big Jeff, about the planting scenario. So, book for hours, and we in actual fact have on our podcasts about the RAV4, whether there's one RAV, two RAVs, hybrid RAVs, I don't care. And by that I mean, we know that there's at least one RAV that's blue, was in the crime lab, and it had two types of DNA in it. It had blood from Stephen Avery, and it had blood from the victim in this case. It also had saliva that was found in a cherry Pepsi can. So you had blood and saliva. No fingerprints were found there were no fingerprints found on the inside. There were 8 sets of fingerprints found on the outside, but none of the fingerprints matched Stephen nor Brenton. Okay, so what do? If you want to convict Stephen, you got to put his DNA with the victim's DNA and missing vehicle all together as a package deal. Because now you've got a missing victim, in this case Teresa Horbach, who had visited Stephen Avery's salvage yard. She's gone missing. Oh, look at this. Suddenly you find her vehicle on his salvage yard containing his blood. Now, I think you will agree with me that's bad. And even Kevin sort of said,
I wouldn't want it to happen to me, let's put it that way.
No. But the thing is, Stephen could have come up with a logical excuse. He could have easily said, look, when Teresa Horbach came to my property to take pictures, she tried to start her car, it didn't start. I said to her, look, don't worry, I work with cars, let me just check your car, your ignition, etc., etc. Oh, by the way, he had a cut on his finger, so he could explain, there's a bit of blood here. Oh, look, I went underneath the hood just to check the battery. In other words, he can explain it away. He can even explain the key away. He could have said, oh yeah, I found the key here. I didn't know who it belonged to. But he never said any of that, Big Jeff. He was shocked as everybody else was when they said, "What's the victim's car doing here?" And he goes, "I have no idea."
He's not the one for making up elaborate stories.
No.
He's kind of a simple person. You can tell that by the recently released phone call.
He's always said, "Look, if I've done a crime, put me in prison. Give me my lumps, I'll accept it." But he was completely clueless about what had happened with the RAV4. He had no idea. Anyway, how are you going to set up the RAV4, and why is the RAV4 so important? Well, the police, law enforcement needed a reason to raid the salvage yard, right? They did a flyover on the 4th, right, Big Jeff?
They did indeed.
No one mentioned seeing a RAV4 anywhere. They flew the plane for hours, right? No one.
Oh, they only managed 3 minutes of video of the 80 salvage yard.
Correct.
We don't know how that's possible.
Correct. But the important thing is, Big Jeff, no one saw a RAV4. Now, if you have nefarious thoughts, think about this. You're in the air, you have a beautiful view of the salvage yard and the surrounding quarries. You can see all the little roads that lead to the salvage yard. You can easily say, right, see that spot there? That's a place to plant your car. And if you notice, Big Jeff, the RAV and the plates are all on the periphery of the salvage yard. Very easy to plant because you don't have to go deep in the salvage yard to hide something. You just dump it on the periphery. Why is that good? Lo and behold, searchers were able to find the plates and the RAV4. Tic-tac-toe. Ham of God comes on the salvage yard within 20 minutes. The Holy Spirit guided her to the Toyota RAV4. Right? Right?
Well, as Bill Billy has told us, Fassbender and we tell Radant.
Yes.
And they also tell Stephen in his November 9th arrest interview. We know how you got the RAV in the back.
Yes.
You drove it through the deer camp.
Yep.
Right?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, so that's another good reason why it's on the edge of the property.
Correct.
Again, they've deviated from that story. And yet another thing they've deviated from. Yep.
Correct.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. No, not at all, Big Jeff. That's a critical piece of information, by the way. So, with the RAV4, right? Two things that were a surprise. One, when Pam of God, or Pam Sturm, saw the RAV4, she got taken aback because she goes, this is blue. It ain't dark green. Because prior to that, in every missing girl poster, it's dark green, dark green, dark green. Karen Horbach, the mother, rings up. What's the color of the car? Dark green. It's dark green everywhere, right? Suddenly, Pam of God sees a blue RAV4.
It's more blue than green. It's a bluish green.
Phones up her cousin, who happens to be Pagel, and reports it. And you can see in the transcript that she's very nervous, thinking, aren't we meant to be looking for a dark green one? But clearly, it was blue. But
believe me, we are going to go deeply into the RAV on Thursday. So there's a lot of people who want to weigh in on the RAV, and that's just scratching the surface.
Yes. Well, here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. When her and Nicole were looking at the RAV4, they looked inside. They obviously looked inside, and they're able to see various objects within the RAV4. And it became obvious from the photographs that Nicole took that the front windows were clear. You can easily see inside the RAV4. Plus, Pam of God was a private investigator with 9 years of experience. What do you do if you want to see evidence of foul play or a struggle? You look for blood, right? And there were 6 drops of blood in the RAV4, 5 at the front, 1 in a door panel that you couldn't see. Now, when they looked at the blood samples, they said that the CD case, which was on the passenger seat, half of it was covered in a blood smear. Now, Pam of God would have definitely looked at the ignition, right? Because was there a key?
Was there a key? Yeah, absolutely.
Was there a key? So none of them mentioned seeing any blood. Along come the investigators with torches, right? They obviously would have. You look at the photographs, Jeff, that have just been released. I think there's 5 people around the RAV4. 5. Not one of them with torches mentioned seeing blood.
And
Right?
just to put that in context, there are some photos that were actually very recently released, even today,
Yeah.
as we do this recording from the Wisconsin State Police.
Yes.
And there's even more pictures of the RAV than we've ever seen before. And you can clearly see the same thing that you're just articulating. People standing around the RAV.
Yeah.
They should have had view of the massive pools of blood that were in the.
Yeah. I mean, look, when you go through the whole trial, the accusations that the state did were all smoke and mirrors. All smoke and mirrors. But here's the important thing. No one saw any blood inside the Toyota RAV4. But what they did was they checked the doors. All the doors were unlocked. They were locked. All closed. They couldn't get in. Right? But what happened was, when Mr. Groffey was at the Madison Crime Laboratory, I found that the door, the driver's side door, was opened. It was unlocked. So therefore, from the salvage yard to the crime lab, someone had unlocked the driver's side door. Where do we find the blood? On the driver's side. Right? And Zellner's experts showed that all you needed was one door to open and the back door, and you drop your blood. Right? You drop your blood. So what I reckon the drop of blood that was on the panel, I can't remember I think it was the passenger side panel, would have been insurance. I.e., if Stephen said, "Oh yeah, I went inside the car, I was bleeding at the time, and I left a couple of drops, accident," they would have said to him, "Well, how do you explain the drop of blood on the passenger side door?" He wouldn't have known about that, right? Because it was hidden. It was hidden by the door. So maybe they just put one there for insurance purposes to catch him out in time, right? To catch him out in time.
Could we take 1 second to talk about the volume of Stephen's blood that they actually found in the RAV4?
Yeah.
In units that normal people can understand.
Yeah. Well, a drop of blood is you can get a dropper, and you can expel out one drop, and it works out to be about 50 microliters. So 1 mil is 1,000 microliters. So this is 1/50th. So it's a very small volume. 6 drops.
So a dropper like an eyedropper that you might use for Visine. I mean, they're not they're not all calibrated to be the same. But you're talking about the normal thing that you'd find in an eyedropper.
In an eyedropper.
That you give a baby.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, there were 6 of them. So if you work out
the whole
6 drops,
not pools, but
not pools, 6 drops of Stephen Avery's blood, allegedly. That works out to between 300 microliters, less than half a mil. So I played devil's advocate and I said, okay, let's double it to 600 microliters. Let's make an 100% error. We'll double the volume. It's so small you can put it inside a little tube in your pocket and hide it. No one will know that you've got it. Now, if you're going to seed the RAV, right, with Stephen's blood, the way I would do it is I would personally use the 1996 blood vial. Why? Because A, law enforcement have got access to it at any time. B, it's got Stephen's name on it. Therefore,
under your doubling scenario,
yep.
how many drops of blood are in one of those vials?
Well, if I double the volume, then we're looking at 12 drops of blood. If you're looking at the original volume, you're looking. So one of these tubes holds 1.5 mils of blood. Right? They're microtubes.
How many drops is?
Oh well, if each one is 50 microliters, you're looking at 600 microliters is 12 drops. You're looking at about 24, 25 drops of blood in one of these tubes. And no one will know it's missing from your blood vial because it's a small volume. Right? So all you need is half a tube of blood in one of these micro tubes, which any laboratory's got. Bang, put it in your pocket, have a little dropper. You can now see the RAV.
Well, the point being is it's so little blood that you're probably even going to miss it from that big tube that they have.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Now, with these blood vials, they normally hold between 7.5 to 10 mils of blood. When the FBI measured the volume, there was 5.5 mils. 5.5. So quite a volume of blood was gone. And there's evidence that the cap, the purple cap, someone's moved it because someone's introduced air in the tube because there's blood around the rim. So someone's removed the cap from that blood vial. So me, if I was doing it, I would use the blood vial. Open up one door, and of course the passenger door, with a dropper, smear the blood, droplets. Close the door, and the idiot who seated the car forgot to lock it. He left it open, right? Now, it's pretty obvious that when the RAV4 was at the salvage yard, they checked all the doors because they wanted to move the vehicle, right? Put it on the trailer. They couldn't get in. They didn't open it up. No one admitted opening up any of the doors. Nicole, using tissue, tried all the doors, right? They were all locked because they wanted to get inside. It was all locked.
Right, and I think one thing to remind everybody of is that that they were so sure that there was no blood on the salvage yard.
Yes.
That they told Blake Hallback that there's no sign of foul play in the car.
Correct.
So
correct.
It kind of leads one to believe that this planted blood, which would have been a clear sign that there was some foul play in the car, wasn't there when it was on the yard.
Yeah. So people have worked out how long it would have taken the driver to go from the salvage yard to the laboratory. There's a missing hour. Right? It took much longer than expected. I know that you must drive slowly because it was raining, but there's a missing hour somewhere. And to seat the car, you could do it within 2 to 5 minutes. Anyone could do it. A child could do it. With a dropper, you drop the blood in the car, and they did such a bad job that the crime scene is too clean. Because what I mean by that is, when they interrogated Brendan, they said, "What did you do with the car? What did you do with her car?" And Brendan said, "Well, me and Uncle Steve, we drove it to the pit." Right? Now, you know that when you drive a car somewhere, you've got to put the key in the ignition, turn the ignition, you've got to put the car into gear, you've got to put the handbrake down, you've got to open and close a door, etc., etc. Well, the problem was, there's no blood anywhere. It's absent. So how did the car drive itself to the pit? Because it makes no sense, right?
It's yet another case of the state wanting it both ways. He was actively bleeding or he wasn't. Which one?
That's correct. So if he's actively bleeding, there should be blood everywhere. There's not. If he's wearing gloves, there shouldn't be any blood at all. So therefore, I believe whoever seeded the car with his blood, the whole point was to point the finger at Stephen straight away. Hey, what's your blood doing in here? Remember? Well, when we interrogated Stephen on November the 9th, he said to him, what's your DNA doing in her car? And of course, Stephen was completely mystified, but there was only one problem. They didn't know the DNA results until the 10th. So therefore, you have another Nostradamus moment whereby we get to saying, what's your DNA doing in her vehicle before he knew the result.
He also asked him what is her DNA doing in his house. I mean, he was just talking out of a different orifice.
That is correct. Remember, law enforcement are able to lie, and he did so openly, because when the investigators went into Stephen's trailer, they found drops of blood on the door frame, in the bathroom, in the sink, and so they had assumed it was from the victim. Of course, it was from Stephen, who reopened up a cut on the 3rd, I believe, because he was doing something with his sister's trailer, and he was bleeding. And here's the kicker, Big Jeff. He went to his grand dam, right, to retrieve, he said, a phone charger. Well, there was blood everywhere, and guess where it was? On the gear shift lever. So, if he's actively bleeding and he left blood on the gear shift lever and on the central console, how come you don't see that in the Toyota RAV4? Because it makes no sense, Big Jeff.
A second question you might ask is if he was actually able to take the time to clean.
Yes.
Why wouldn't he have cleaned this most obvious spot by the ignition, which is the most blatant, the most blatant stain of his blood in the wrap? That doesn't make any sense.
Correct.
The shape of it also doesn't make sense to me. I've always thought that the place where they did the swab, that's where it's obvious that the Q-tip action went, was to cover up sort of the odd shape that the drop probably would have made when they put it on.
Yes, and again, Zellner's experts put paper on a similar car, and with a person who was heavily bleeding, not one drop got into the ignition area. Not one drop. It's too far away, right? It's too far away. And remember, Stephen knows about DNA and the power of DNA. Is he going to leave? Is he going to enter into a car where he's openly bleeding? I mean, think about it. The victim is dead, right? The victim is dead. He's got a minute to put on gloves or wash his hands, put on a bandage. No. What does he decide to do? Duct tape even. What does he decide to do? He's going to leave the lab perfect samples of his blood so for Culhane to put him back into prison again. But at the same time, he's going to remove micro droplets of blood from his garage and his trailer. So there's no evidence of Teresa Horbach ever being in both places. And yet, he gifts the state with a Toyota RAV4 with his blood in it.
Unbelievable.
Right.
So another question I'd like to ask you about the blood. I mean, you're familiar how like these these Indian yogis are able to do fantastic things with their bodies that normal people can't do.
Yes.
Do you think Stephen is able to do that and make himself able to bleed blood flake?
No.
How do you do that? How do you bleed blood flakes? How is it possible that a blood flake could have been left in the RAV? Did it fall off the steering wheel? Did he,
No. I can't answer that, Big Jeff. You only get the blood flakes if the blood is completely desiccated and dried out. And Zellner's experts did an experiment whereby they put blood on a sink and they let it completely dry out. They then used a scalpel blade to scrape it. And lo and behold, what do you get? Flakes, blood flakes. So one might argue, oh, well, maybe the carpet had like a sealant on it. But if it did, you wouldn't expect a flake. You expect a round droplet on the surface of the carpet, right? But that's not what you got. You got flakes, which means that somehow the blood had dried out. So
to me,
yep.
That is probably the second best evidence of tampering. The fact that there's blood flakes there, that just doesn't make any sense to me.
No, normally the blood on a carpet would be absorbed. And if you look at the carpet doesn't look in good condition. It doesn't look like it's just been recently waterproofed, because the carpet looks pretty dirty. One would have expected it to absorb straight into the carpet and not form a crust. So yeah, the whole car as a crime scene, it was amateurish what they did because of the absence of blood elsewhere. It made no sense. Plus, remember, Big Jeff, there's no mixing of blood of the victim and the suspect.
You'd expect minimum, lots of mixtures, right? You'd expect it on the key,
question,
right? You'd expect it in the back seat with all the blood.
Yeah. Oh, no question.
Bleeding, throws her into the back of the car. How come there's not one point where there's a mixture at all? Just makes no sense.
But the other thing that doesn't make sense, Big Jeff, is that the fact that, hey, they did this fire, right? They did this big bonfire. Why? Because they're going to burn the victim, right? They're going to burn the victim. So why would Stephen and Brendan shoot the victim 10 times with a minimum of 2 shots to the skull, decide to put it into the RAV4 with a raging fire going on, and then thought, wait a minute, the fire's only 10 feet that way. So they take her out of the RAV4, right, and then bring it to the fire. And there's no droplets of blood from the RAV4 to anywhere else. Right?
Nobody saw them back the RAV out so they could just push her out, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what? Wait a minute. You built this fire to burn the victim, but you decide to place her in the RAV4, but then you took her back out and you carried her, and they were asked, Brendan was asked, did Stephen have any blood on him? Nope. Did you have any blood on you? Nope. We're talking about a profusely bleeding wounds from a victim. There'll be blood everywhere, right? Nothing. So the whole scenario, the whole scenario is rubbish and garbage. How they bought it, I have no idea. But yes, it is
poor planning for the master planners putting in that RAV.
Yeah. But Big Jeff, in my opinion, the whole thing was to get the troops onto the salvage yard. Oh, we found the RAV4, let's go for it. Right?
Now with the you've explained and used the argument that was used in NAM 1 of how the blood was placed into the RAV that was taken from the dropper. What about the EDTA that was done by the FBI?
Well, again, this is another example of junk science. The last time the FBI did EDTA testing, now EDTA is an anticoagulant. It's present in the purple top tube. It prevents the blood from coagulating and remains in liquid form, right? So the argument is, hey, if you use the blood from the purple top, if the FBI do EDTA testing, it should be present. If no EDTA is present, then that must mean it's fresh blood. The problem for the FBI was they didn't have a test. They didn't have a routine test for EDTA testing. The last time they did EDTA testing was in the OJ trial. And that was a disaster for them because through machine fault, they found residual traces of EDTA, which means that, hey, according to the defense, the state tainted the blood with blood from a vial. OJ walks, right? So now the FBI were requested to do EDTA testing by the state, right? And as we know, when Buting and Strang discovered the blood vial, the first thing that Kratz said was, we want to suppress it, right? They were so worried because now the defense found a tube of blood with Stephen Avery's name where Lenk or someone else could have easily got access to it for planting purposes. Well,
Link's was the last name on the evidence.
Correct. Well, now the state pleaded with the judge, look, please let us test with EDTA for EDTA. So they took a big gamble, right? They took a huge gamble. So if the FBI found EDTA, it means that the planting scenario is a winner. If there's no EDTA, then another blood source had to be used. So if you're the state and you're Culhane, how do you overcome this? And the answer is a piece of cake, right? And it just occurred to me it just occurred to me that when you plant the blood in the RAV4, the whole purpose is to prove that that blood comes from Stephen Avery, which means you have a full genomic profile belonging to Stephen Avery. It's his blood because you do a presumptive test for blood. You framed him. Bang, gone. All right. Now the state wanted to do EDTA testing. So the FBI had to start from scratch and purpose-built this protocol that would test for EDTA. But there's one problem. The blood that they were going to test was, I think, 11 years old. Old blood. The FBI, when they did their controls, they could only guarantee a shelf life of 2 years. And some of the solutions that they used, 6 months. So if you test for the presence of EDTA in old blood, you don't know whether the EDTA has degraded or you can't detect it because the levels are so low, right? They've never tested it before in blood that low, in blood that old. So, and plus there were other complications. So when the FBI came back, we did detect an EDTA. Well, the state was laughing their heads off, right? Saying, haha, yeah. But there's an actual easy way to do it. Remember, Culhane also swabbed the Grand Dam. She did presumptive blood tests on the swabs. They had blood. They belonged to Stephen Avery, and she did PCRs on all of those swabs. So she knew she had a set of swabs from RAV4, a set of swabs from the Toyota Grand Dam. All you got to do, Big Jeff, is swap 3 swabs from the RAV4 to the Grand Dam, hand them to the FBI. The FBI will say, no EDTA here. And
so the FBI did not go back to the RAV to take the swabs. They took swabs of swabs.
You cannot believe this, right? What the FBI did was that they asked one of the officers to do control swabs, right? So an officer went inside the RAV4 and did a swab on either side of where the blood was. So it's meant to be a blank, right? But they didn't go back and re-swab the blood. They got handed 3 swabs by the crime lab. Right? Now, a blood swab is a blood swab. So if I hold 2 swabs in front of you and they're both red, and I say to you, one is from the RAV4 and one is from the Grand Dam, you would not know which is which. And if you were smart enough and you say, I'm going to do a DNA profile both are going to come up with a full DNA profile of Stephen Avery. So therefore, Culhane knew the result of every one of the swabs. You take out 3 swabs, swap the boxes, and no one's going to know. No one.
Wow. So that's an excellent way to not leave anything to chance at all. That's could have been perfect at the FBI. I would have detected a damn thing.
And to make matters worse, it was discovered that Culhane had all the swabs, I think, for 5 months at her bench in her cupboard. 5.
Unbelievable.
So they weren't locked up in the storage area. They were in her personal cupboard. So if she foresaw forensic testing for EDTA, she could have easily had swapped the swabs, right? That's how easy it is to do, and the FBI would not have been any wiser to it. Now, Dr. LeBeau was given 3 samples to test. He drew a conclusion on 6 samples. He said none of them have got EDTA. And then when Butik said to him, well, wait a minute, how many did you test? 3. So you've drawn a conclusion on 3 samples you didn't test. And he goes, yep. Yep.
That was quite surprising to me that he could make. That's a pretty bold statement.
The shocker. That's a shocker. Right. So in essence, this is like the burn barrel, right? So if you've got all the electronics and bones and whatever in a burn barrel that's on the deer camp, all you do is you swap the label and say, we didn't get this from the deer camp, we got it from the Dassey yard or from Stevens burn barrel. That's it. You just swap the label.
Old switcheroo.
Yeah. It's the shell game. That's why when I thought of it, I thought, this is a simple shell game. And why is this nefarious? Because the FBI didn't say, give me the RAV, get out of here, I'm going to retest everything de novo. I.e., I'm going to take the swabs, I don't want anything from you. No, they didn't. They accepted the swabs from, now wait a minute, from a laboratory where we know someone had a big conflict of interest. Right?
Absolutely.
Cherie Culhane. Who did all the swabbing? Cherie Culhane. Right? So the FBI never re-swabbed the Toyota RAV4 de novo. They were reliant on your honesty. And that's it.
Wow, that's it. So we've talked about how Cherie has deviated from her own protocol and done not 1, not 2, but 3 suspicious things with regard to testing item FL.
Yes.
We have essentially had a theory Thursday on what could have been done. Not saying that anybody did do this, but what could have been done to fool the EDTA tests of the FBI. If we could talk for a minute about item A23.
Oh God. Oh God.
Because doesn't that to me really seal the deal with regard to I'm only really interested in one person only.
Correct. Believe it or not, and I was shocked. I still haven't recovered from this. Well, when they looked at the Toyota RAV4, what they do is they have a blood splatter expert, a forensic scientist, and what they do is they walk around the RAV4 and they look for signs of fingerprints and also of blood. And that also, Cherie Culhane was there as well in the lab. And I can't remember whether it was Starkey or Groff, but he called over Cherie Culhane. He said, see that stain there? You better take a swab. Now, the reason why that was important was that it happened to be, item 823, happened to be on the door handle at the back. So if you're going to open up the back door and put in a victim. If you're bleeding, you're going to leave droplets of blood on the door handle because you have to open it with your hand, right? Well, there were 8 sets of fingerprints also around the back of the RAV4. None of them matched Stephen. Now, item A23, correct, neither of them, right? So no one had actually had touched that RAV with their bare hands, put it this way. And it's bizarre, right? Because you got blood inside the RAV4, not on the outside. Well, it just so happened there was a blood stain on the back door latch, right? Wow, that's huge. It was given item A23. Anyway, Cherie Cohane, luckily the attorneys questioned her about it, right? Because she wasn't going to open her mouth. She goes, oh yeah, I took a swab, and I believe she did a presumptive test. It proved to be blood, and they asked her, did you do a DNA extraction? Yes, I did, but I only got a partial. All right. But, now here's the important thing. It didn't match Stephen nor Brendan, which must have meant that the blood, the DNA that she isolated, had to be from a male, because that's why she was able to exclude them, right? So not all the loci came up. It was only a partial profile, but you could tell that none of the alleles had matched Stephen nor Brendan. Therefore, item A23 didn't come from Brendan or Stephen. But wait a minute, what is blood doing in the back, where the back door handle is, to open up the Toyota RAV4 to put in a victim, right? Because remember, there was blood of the victim in the back of the RAV4. Well, what Cohane did was, in one report, she said, yeah, I isolated DNA from item A23. And that was it, Big Jeff. She never mentioned item A23 in that report at all. Lo and behold, 2 reports later, she goes, yeah, we isolated item A23, but it only gave a partial profile. That's it. So, wait a minute.
Where was the further investigation? No, I mean, there's
That's it, Big Jeff.
On the back, where was it?
That's it, Big Jeff. Here's a holy grail sample of blood / DNA on the victim's car, on the back door handle. And what does Cherie Cohane do? She did not re-extract it and run it through CODIS.
And what's her reason for not doing this? I think there's only one reason that we can come up with, right? Because it didn't point to Stephen Avery.
It didn't point to Stephen. Now, let me say right now, if it did point to Stephen, I'm telling you right now, Ken Kratz would have had another press conference and announced it to the world, because that would have
the Mexican happy dance, around his sombrero.
Yeah, that would have sunk Stephen Avery big time, right? Big time. His blood on the back door handle where you put in a victim. But the problem was, none of that matched or pointed to Brendan or Stephen. So what do? They ignored it, right? They ignored it. Thank you, Big Jeff. If I could just finish. There is another sample that we haven't mentioned, and that's item CX. Now, item CX was blood. Obviously, it must have been fresh blood that was found in the Manitowoc County gravel pit, in one of the quarries. Why is that significant? Because that's where cremains were found, right? Did Cohane run CX through CODIS?
No, there was a full extraction on CX?
Yes. They got a full DNA extraction from item CX. It's a male DNA. It doesn't belong to any of the Averys or Dassies. But Cohane didn't cross-check it with anyone else, right? And all one had to do was to run it through CODIS to see if it actually had belonged to someone. And the person I can't get out of my mind is Sean Rudy. I can't get him out of my mind. It's a theory.
Welcome to Theory Thursday.
I love it. It's a theory. But hey, wouldn't you just say, no, it wasn't him?
Well, why not put it to bed? It astounds me. It astounds me that this evidence exists, and we have a murder case. There's potentially innocent people sitting in jail.
Yep.
They deserve access to potentially exculpatory information. And if all it's a matter of running it through CODIS, why not? Why isn't Kathleen Zellner asking that this information? Right?
Well, look, what you do, Big Jeff, it's pretty obvious. You need to get that swab of A23. I have a feeling it could well belong to the murderer.
I have a feeling it might have disappeared in a flood, because that happens in the
I have a feeling.
It's just disappeared.
I have a feeling that item A23 and the RAV are gone.
All right. Well, very good. I think we're sensitive to the time. I really appreciate your time. I know it's extremely valuable.
Pleasure.
The boys are very lucky to have you on the case.
I have a question. Silkman, have you looked at the new photos they just released?
I have had a look, Bill Billy. I haven't had a mega close. I've had a look at the photographs of the RAV. The ones where I was very interested in were Cuss Road. Oh my God.
Did you see the diagrams of the bodies and where they claim the bone fragments came from?
No, I haven't seen that one. I haven't seen those yet.
It's right towards the end.
Right. No, I haven't seen them as yet. I had a quick look last night, but I just got blown away with the ones at Cuss Road. It's quite clear there's something.
There's over 75 photos of Cuss Road.
It's huge. It's huge.
I know.
Amazing how they were buried until now.
Yeah. Nobody. The whole idea is that you're not allowed to ask any questions about Cuss Road, but that's a podcast for another day, guys. But if I could just summarize up and just say, look, thank you very much, Big Jeff. And now you can see no one can just within 5 minutes understand all the DNA evidence. My background is in DNA, and it took me a lot of hard work to follow the case and to understand what was going on. So I haven't had any arguments with any guilters, and if they want to discuss DNA with me, I'm more than happy to.
Well, they're more likely to delete your comments from their channel. There's a vile YouTuber by the name of Megan Elizabeth who
that was terrible.
If she wants to come and debate, we'll give her an open forum on one of our Sunday or Saturday podcasts. Come on, and have a debate with a PhD in microbiology.
Yes. I made the mistake of responding, and I wrote probably 1,000 words. Like when I give a response, it's not a yes or a no. I explain my reasoning. And
that's very true.
Yeah, and it's not like 2 words. I'll give a full response with documentation, of course. Remember, these 2 guys are in prison, and they're serving life in prison. If they don't belong there, give me a reason why they do. The whole state's case. It's just hot air, and slowly it's being dissolved away.
With that, thank you, Dr. Silkman, and we'll close it down from here. I think we're sensitive to the time. I really appreciate your time. I know it's extremely valuable.
Pleasure.
The boys are very lucky to have you on the case. Well, thanks everybody for listening. And with that, this has been a Foul Play production.